Our MAPI is about bringing together a coalition of willing stakeholders. These are organizations, leaders, community members, both community members that are context experts, which saying they are living in these conditions or have lived with poverty as a part of their story, or our business leaders, our faith leaders, our elected leaders that are all willing to come together because they know the devastating impact that poverty has on our community. So they are willing to work together in ways that are different to tackle the systemic root causes of poverty and not just provide programs or interventions that aren't able to help lift people out of poverty and give them an opportunity to really succeed in life. The collective means that we are working together with a common agenda, that we all agree on the change that we want to go after together. So for instance, if we think that poverty, and we know that poverty is a lack of enough income to cover your needs, so we know that income is one of the issues. And one of the things that we've worked together on is trying to increase incomes so that at a minimum people are making $15 an hour. We've all agreed on that, so we can bring our collective talents and resources and skills together to try to convince other leaders in the community to raise their minimum wage levels to $15. That's a way for us to come together on something that we believe has big impact, and kind of using our collective might and power on something that we can align our values around. Systemic change is change that happens at the root of a problem, that gets at the very cause of it and is not working on a surface level. So it's not, for instance, if you have a cold and you take cold medicine, but you're not really addressing what the real root cause of the cold is, then you can get rid of it or you can mask it for a while, but you can't really get rid of it. And while there may be value to making people feel better while they have the cold, the reality is you don't want them to have the cold and you don't want it to come back. So getting at the root of poverty, so the root causes of poverty, trying to understand what are the persistent reinforcing loops that happen in poverty, and trying to address those so that you can resolve the root causes once and for all, is what systemic change is all about. So community voice, and I will kind of dive down into those with lived experience, have to help shape the world that they want to live in, the community that they want to live in. Those of us who haven't had the experience can be empathetic, but we can't actually say that we've walked in the shoes, and so that we don't understand necessarily what it's going to take. Those with lived experience have to be the ones to show us the way, and they have to be the ones to validate that any of the solutions that we come up with are going to address those root cause problems.
Good morning, I'm Regina Lawrence, the Collective Impact Manager with our MAPI. What I would say I bring to the table, I am a dedicated Rochesterian. I just returned home after 26 years. I am dedicated to using my experiences in community development to assist the residents of Rochester. Also, my unique lived experience as well as being able to build relationships with humans on different types.
I think it's very difficult for those who are content experts or those who kind of have the wherewithal or the ability to make the changes, have the only voice in the solution. So it's really important that authentic community engagement includes those who are impacted or who are benefiting from the work that gets done, so that we provide solutions that work for that target population.
The problem of poverty in Rochester is multifaceted. There isn't one thing that has caused poverty, but I will be very clear in saying that the basis for what we see in our communities has been the result of structural and institutional racism.
We know that there is a disproportionate part of our population who are Black and brown. And we also know that Black and brown communities are often over-policed. And so the impact is that there is a lot of incarceration for people in our community. And if you look at the data, it is stark, how Black and brown bodies are actually criminalized. And so one, we have to fix the bias in the system for who decides what is right and wrong and who gets punished for it, and make sure that those systems are fixed.
Policies that are geared toward majority population and are not necessarily beneficial to the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color. So we need to be able to address policy at that very basic level of equality before we could really see a break in the cycle and the systemic issues that result from poverty.
The reality is that in a lot of cases, people who are poor are also over criminalized, they're over policed, they're over fined, or they pay higher fees because they have less income to start with, and they pay a higher proportion of those fees and fines of their income. So that tends to criminalize poverty. And the other thing is that if a person has gone into the criminal justice system and they have served all of their time and they've done their probation, they sometimes come out of those systems still with no rights or with the inability to get adequate housing, to kind of start their lives over, to get a second chance, which perpetuates poverty, perpetuates them not being able to take care of their families, and so their families being, very disadvantaged. And so we need to figure a way to allow, folks who have completed their sentences and completed all of their punishment to get true second chances and to get a good start. And for people who are poor, not to have to pay higher fees, higher fines, or potentially be jailed for things that those of us with income and with access don't have to kind of deal with. Poverty is a lack of income. Most people get income through jobs, and if people work 40 hours a week, they should have jobs that pay a living wage. For me, that's the simple answer, and I think that every full-time person working full-time should have access to a living wage job. If that starts at $15, that's what we're going to propose and push and advocate for. But ultimately, we want people to be able to raise their families when they're working hard, so that they don't have to spend time cobbling together multiple jobs without good benefits, without decent pay, to to take care of their basic needs. Community can support our MAPI by supporting the advocacy work that we're doing, to change policies and laws that especially impact poor communities. So things like clean slate legislation, bail reform, the Child Tax Credit Act, the child care, changes in child care systems, the reimbursement rates for low-wage jobs that are, reimbursed by Medicaid or by state funding, helping us to address the benefits cliff so that people can have access to benefits longer as they are trying to, make moves to have more productive lives. So a lot of advocacy work. I'd say learning and understanding what poverty means in our community, who's poor, what the challenges are they have with being poor, whether it's lack of transportation, extra supports that are needed as people are trying to get fully employed, the limits of maybe the educational system and the impact that it has on being able to access decent jobs. Like, how can community members help? They can help by trying to address in their own way the institutions and the structures that have policies that have held people back. Income is a major proportion of people's livelihoods. How people make money is mostly through income, and it's through jobs. And so we need jobs to pay a fair, livable wage in order for people to be able to live a productive life. Our MAPI is advocating for a starting minimum wage of $15 an hour. Our Level Up champions have committed to that, and we will continue to encourage them to continually raise their minimum until we get to a point where the livable wage is a standard in our community. The connection between low wages and poverty is that if you're not making more than $15 an hour, you're going to be considered poor by the federal poverty standards. So $15 an hour for a family of four represents a standard, a threshold that is higher than the federal poverty limit. And so we are pushing to make sure that in our community, $15 is the minimum. We've had such great response from our community in general. We started this campaign officially last summer, and we were trying to get the 10,000 residents' wages lifted to $15 an hour. We thought that it was a stretch goal. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to make it, but by the end of the year, we'd actually gotten 11,260 residents' wages raised to $15 an hour. So we exceeded our expectations, and we had more than 75 organizations self-report that they were indeed Level Up champions and wanted to be noted as such. So our initial intent was exceeded, and our initial goal was exceeded, and we are looking forward to having doubling that by the end of this year. So I would love to see a point where our community sets an expectation that any employer pays at least $15 an hour. And those that are even more progressive and understand the connection between wages and poverty and wages and thriving and the economic engine that it provides to our community would level up, would raise their minimum wages to a living wage standard. We know that it is not just about income. It is a lot about income, but it's also about providing people with jobs in places where they feel like they can thrive and do their best. So we are hopeful that we will create a set of conditions in our community where there is hiring, promotion, and retention, and support systems that are identified and implemented that give every employee, every resident an opportunity to really live their best life and do their best work in a place where they live. So our MAPI has three guiding principles. One of them is around building and supporting our community. The second one is around addressing trauma. And the third one is around addressing structural racism. It is very important that these principles guide the work that we do so that we understand the connection between structural racism and poverty, knowing that as we know that in our community, Black and brown residents are more likely to be poor than white residents are, and that we know that some of the systems that we have built are biased against black and brown people. Understanding the racial makeup of these issues helps us to figure out how we can solve it, and so that is why our MAPI puts a focus around one of its guiding principles around addressing structural racism. We also know that we want our community to be healthy, and we want people to want to be in healthy, strong neighborhoods, and so figuring out how do we build neighborhoods, strong, healthy neighborhoods, is a second principle that we are very focused on. And then the other principle that is important to us is that around addressing trauma, and that we know that the problems around in our community around poverty have been built up over decades or hundreds of years of trauma that has sat in our families through generations, and that generational trauma impacts families not only today but in the future. How do we help families to overcome and deal with those traumas so that they can kind of shed some of that and become less connected to that trauma and build strong lives? I was like, this is so badass. I was like, this is like, it was